I used to believe our house was like every other on our street, peeling paint, a crooked mailbox, a yard, where weeds won every war. From the outside, no one would have guessed what went on inside. That house didn't whisper secrets. It screamed them, then buried them under layers of quiet dinners and polite hellos. My name is Caden Reese. I'm 31 now, a family lawyer in Delaware. But before any of that, I was just a boy growing up in a small Tennessee town where the dirt ran red and the air always smelled like rain was coming. Back then, I didn't know that love could be dangerous. I just knew my father had a temper and my mother had quiet eyes that tried to hide everything. I was 6 the first time he hit me. We were sitting at the dinner table, me, my mom Eliza, and my father Warren. I knocked over a glass of milk. It wasn't on purpose, but he didn't care. His hand slammed against my shoulder so hard I fell backward off the chair. My ears rang. My mother gasped and reached for me, but that only made it worse. "You think this is your house to do whatever you want," he roared. He dragged her away from me by the hair. I remember curling into a ball on the floor, trying to block out her cries. That sound, my mother's voice breaking under his fists, became the lullaby I never wanted. Later that night, she sat on the edge of my bed, her hand gently rubbing the bruise already blooming on my skin. "You have to be strong, okay?" she whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better." I didn't understand why she was the one apologizing. I only knew that in that moment, with her hand on my shoulder and her voice trembling, I made a promise, one I didn't yet understand. I would protect her. Somehow, someday. That was the night I stopped calling our house home, and it was under that same roof that my mother showed me the only thing stronger than pain, quiet love. There was an old oak tree in our backyard, tall and wide, with limbs that stretched like arms, trying to hold up the sky. That tree became the one place my father never bothered with, maybe because it didn't bend to him. Underneath it, my mother carved out a different kind of world, one where fear didn't follow. After the worst nights, after the yelling and the slamming doors, she'd take my hand and lead me outside. We'd sit beneath that tree with a blanket and whatever book she could grab in the dark. Sometimes she read fairy tales, sometimes she just made them up. Her voice was soft, even when her lips were split. She didn't talk about what had just happened. She didn't have to. In her stories, the monsters were always defeated. And somehow, even though I didn't believe in magic, I believed in her. She once pointed to the stars and said, "Even when everything is dark, they're still there. You just have to look up." I remember nodding, though my face was still damp from crying. She smiled at me like I was the only reason she kept going. The older I got, the more I noticed her strength wasn't loud. It didn't shout or slam doors. It was in the way she got up every morning, packed my lunch, kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. It was in the way she smoothed her sleeves to hide the bruises and still managed to hum while she cooked. She never said she was strong. She just was. I started spending more time under that tree even when she wasn't there. I guess I was hoping her quiet would rub off on me, that I could learn how to hold myself together without letting him see the cracks. Isla was born when I was 8. I remember the way my mother held her like she was made of glass and prayers. For a moment I thought maybe she would change everything, that maybe my father would soften or at least forget to be cruel. And in a way he did. But only toward her. Warren called her his little star. He cooed at her, bought her toys we could barely afford, carried her on his shoulders like she was the best thing he'd ever done. He smiled more in those early days after she arrived, but not at me, not at my mother, just at Isla. For a while I was grateful. I thought maybe his kindness to her meant he was changing. But it didn't take long to understand the truth. He'd simply chosen a new favorite, and that meant there was even less room for me. Once I accidentally knocked over one of Isla's toys, a plastic rattle. It rolled under the table and I crawled to get it before anyone noticed. but he noticed. "How dare you make your sister cry?" he bellowed, though she hadn't even made a sound yet. He struck me across the face so hard my ears rang. I stumbled backward, blinking away tears. Isla started crying, then not for the toy, but because she saw what he'd done. She ran to me, clutching my leg with her tiny arms, but he pulled her away, rocking her like I was the one who'd hurt her. My mother stood in the doorway, her hands shaking, eyes red. She didn't say a word. That night she held us both in her arms on the floor of the living room. "I love you both," she whispered, brushing my hair back. "No matter what happens." But I knew something was breaking inside her, and inside me, too. Not because I was unloved, but because love had started to feel like something I had to survive. By the time I turned 11, my father's drinking had turned into something meaner. He didn't just lash out when he was angry, he looked for reasons to be angry. A cabinet left open, the volume on the TV, the way Mom looked at him too long. Or not long enough. Mom stopped talking back. She used to plead with him, try to calm him down, but now she barely raised her voice. She moved like someone trying not to wake a monster. Her eyes always tired, her shoulders always pulled in. She'd sit in the kitchen with a cold cup of tea, staring at the wall like it might answer something she couldn't say out loud. Once I asked her if she was okay. She smiled, soft and hollow. "I'm fine, Caden. Just tired." That was the last time she said it like she believed it. I started keeping track of things, not because I thought it would help, but because I didn't know what else to do. In an old composition notebook, I wrote down what I saw, dates, bruises, the way Isla flinched when doors slammed. I sketched diagrams of our house and circled the places we hid. I recorded the things he shouted even when they didn't make sense. I hid the notebook beneath a loose floorboard in my room. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know if it was a diary or evidence or just my way of staying sane. But writing it down made it real. It was my way of saying, this happened. We didn't imagine it. The pages filled up faster than I expected. And every night when Isla drifted off beside me, I'd sit in the dark, pressing pen to paper, trying not to cry, while the walls remembered what everyone else wanted to forget. It was a gray October afternoon, the kind where the clouds sat low and the air felt heavy. I'd stayed late at the library finishing an essay. When I got home, something felt wrong before I even opened the door. The silence was too thick. No TV, no humming from the kitchen, no Isla's voice. My father was on the couch, an empty bottle at his feet. His eyes were dull. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She fell," he said without looking at me. "Down the stairs. She's at the hospital." I didn't wait for anything more. I ran. No jacket, no umbrella. Just ran, heart pounding harder than my legs could keep up with. When I got there, a nurse led me to the ER. Isla was sitting in a plastic chair in the hallway, her face buried in her doll. When she saw me, she threw herself into my arms, sobbing. "She won't wake up," she cried. "Mom won't wake up." I didn't want to believe her. I held her tighter, trying not to fall apart. A doctor appeared and led me into a room where my mother lay on a bed, pale and still. Her hair was matted and the bruises on her arms and neck looked too deliberate to come from any fall. "We did everything we could," the doctor said. "She suffered a severe head trauma." "I'm sorry." I stood there frozen, staring at the shell of the woman who once sang under the oak tree. Her hand was cold in mine. I wanted to scream, to rip the walls apart, to drag my father here and make him see what he'd done. But I didn't scream. I couldn't. I sat beside her numb while the fluorescent lights hummed above us like nothing had changed. At the funeral, my father stood stiff in an old suit smelling of liquor. He said nothing to me. Neighbors whispered behind cupped hands, suspicion dancing in their eyes, but no one spoke it aloud. I had the notebook filled with bruises and dates and words I could barely read through the tears. But it wasn't enough. Not to prove what he'd done. Not to undo it. After everyone left, I sat in the backyard under the oak tree, Isla curled beside me, and I whispered to the wind what I couldn't say to anyone else. 2 weeks after we buried my mother, the front door opened, and she walked in. Rhea. The name had lived in our walls for months, whispered behind closed doors, muttered in arguments that ended with shattered plates and my mother's tears. I had seen her name in the messages I found on my father's old phone, tucked away in the drawer he thought I wouldn't check. My mother had begged him to stay away from her. Now she was in our kitchen, laughing like she owned it. I stood frozen in the hallway as she unpacked grocery bags and kissed my father's cheek. The stench of her perfume mixed with his liquor made me want to throw up. "Who is she?" I asked. My father looked at me, eyes glassy. "This is Rhea," he said flatly. "She's living here now. If you've got a problem with that, you can get out." I glanced at Isla, who was clutching the hem of my shirt, her face pale. Rhea walked past us like we were furniture. That night I heard Rhea yelling at Isla in the living room. Isla had spilled a glass of water. "You're just as useless as your mother," Rhea snapped. I stormed in before I could think. "Don't talk to her like that." Rhea raised a hand to slap me, but I caught her wrist. My father came in then. "You dare touch her," he slurred. I was protecting my sister. His fist met my jaw, and the next thing I knew he was dragging me to the door. "Get out." I didn't pack. I didn't say goodbye. I stepped into the cold with nothing but the uniform from my grocery job and a backpack that didn't even hold a change of clothes. The door slammed behind me, and I heard the lock slide into place. That night I slept in a park 2 miles from our house, curled up on a bench with my backpack as a pillow. The cold worked its way into my bones, but the silence was worse. I kept replaying Isla's face, how small she looked, how scared. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep drifting. I needed help. I walked to the only house I thought might take me in Tommy's. His mother, Linda, had always been kind. When she opened the door and saw me soaked and shaking, she didn't ask questions. She pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and put a plate of food in front of me. I broke down, told her everything. She listened without blinking. When I finished, she said, "You need to call your aunt." I hadn't spoken to Aunt Marla in years, not since she stopped coming around because of my father. But I still had her number tucked in my wallet. My hands shook as I dialed. "Caden," she said, startled. "I need help," I managed. "It's Dad. Isla's still there. I don't know what to do." "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm coming." By the next evening, I was at her place in Nashville. She and Uncle Troy, big, quiet, steady, didn't need convincing. After I told them what had happened, Troy leaned forward and said, "We'll go back for her." His voice was calm, but something in it made me believe him. That night I slept in a bed that didn't creak when I breathed. The smell of coffee and laundry detergent filled the house instead of alcohol. It felt strange, safe. But I didn't let myself settle, because Isla was still there, and I wasn't done. We pulled up to the house just after noon, but it felt like midnight. The windows were still curtains drawn like they were hiding something. I stepped out of the car with my heart pounding and my fists clenched. Uncle Troy walked beside me without a word, every step steady sure. I knocked once, then twice. The door creaked open, and there she was, Rhea. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw me. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I'm here for Isla," I said. She laughed, cold and brittle. "She's not going anywhere." I pushed past her. Troy followed. "Isla," I called out. A small voice answered from down the hall. "Caden." I ran to the bedroom. She was sitting on the floor with her doll, her cheek red and swollen. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "You came," she sobbed. I dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around her. "I told you I would." Behind us, Ria's voice rose in shrill protest. "She's lying." She fell. Warren appeared then, reeking of bourbon, his eyes bloodshot. "Get out of my house." Troy stepped in front of me. "Touch either of them," he said, "and you'll regret it." Warren's eyes flicked between us. For the first time in my life, I saw him hesitate. Isla gripped my hand. "I want to go with Caden." That was all we needed. As we walked out, Ria screamed behind us, but her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She didn't follow. Warren didn't move. Back in the car, Isla leaned into me, still crying. I held her close, whispering that she was safe now that it was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Not really. Not yet. The first few weeks after bringing Isla home felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. She slept with her doll tucked against her chest and no longer flinched when doors closed. Aunt Marla brushed her hair in the mornings. Uncle Troy taught her how to throw a softball in the backyard. Slowly, she came back to life. But I couldn't sit still. While Isla rebuilt, I felt pulled toward something larger, something I couldn't quite name, until one night, sitting at the kitchen table, I opened the old notebook I'd hidden for years. The one with every bruise, every date, every word my mother had ever been too afraid to speak. That was the moment I knew. I didn't want revenge. I wanted something stronger, something that could outlast fists and fear. I wanted justice. When I told Marla I wanted to study law, she just nodded and said, "Then let's get to work." I applied myself harder than I ever had: books, essays, late nights, fueled by memory and rage. I got into a state college on scholarship, then law school in Delaware 2 years later. Isla, now 10, gave me a drawing before I left me, standing beneath the oak tree, holding a book, with our mother smiling beside me. "You're gonna help people like her," she said, placing it in my suitcase. I cried in the hallway before getting on the bus. Every class, every lecture, every case study, I devoured it all like it was oxygen. I didn't just want to learn the law, I wanted to master it, to understand how people like my father slipped through cracks and how to stop it from happening again. I wasn't trying to become powerful. I was trying to become someone my mother would have had on her side. It had been 10 years since I walked out of that house with Isla's hand in mine. 10 years of school, of grinding, of chasing something I could never quite put down. I was a legal intern now at a family law firm in Delaware, nothing flashy, but the kind of place where real work got done. One morning, my supervisor slid a folder across my desk. "New intake. Domestic violence. You'll assist." I opened the file and froze. Ria Jensen, Defendant Warren Reese. I stared at the names so long that the words blurred. It felt like the floor shifted beneath me. I read the details, slowly: bruises, medical records, a protective order request, a statement describing years of verbal and physical abuse. I couldn't speak. "You all right?" my supervisor asked. "I know them," I said. "She was with my father after my mom died. She lived in our house." He raised an eyebrow. "Can you handle this?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. But I had to. Not for her, for me. Ria came into the office 2 days later. She looked like a shell of who she once was, nervous hands, eyes darting around the room. When she saw me, she stopped. "Caden," she said like she couldn't believe it. I didn't flinch. "Let's sit. We'll go through your statement." She told her story slowly. Her voice cracked more than once. She said she tried to leave 3 times but never made it out the door. At the end of the meeting, she slid an envelope across the table. "It's for Isla," she said. "Tell her I'm sorry." I didn't open it. I just nodded. I wasn't doing this for Ria. I was doing it because my mother never got this chance. The trial lasted 2 days. Ria testified through tears. Photographs and medical reports laid bare the truth. I didn't need to explain who Warren Reese was, not really. The evidence did it for me. The bruises looked too much like the ones I had memorized in my childhood, and when the judge read the verdict guilty of assault protective order, granted something inside me exhaled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. Just a quiet release, like a knot that had been there for too long, finally loosened. Weeks later, I visited him in prison. He was smaller than I remembered. His hair had gone gray, and his eyes, once burning with control, looked tired, unfocused. We sat across from each other, glass between us. "Caden," he said, voice rasped. "You came to gloat." "No," I said. "I came to make sure you heard something." He stared at me, waiting. "I'm not here to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I hope for your sake that you figure out how to become someone my sister doesn't have to fear anymore. Someone she'll never have to see in a courtroom again." He didn't speak, just looked down at his hands. I hung up the receiver and stood. Walking out, the air felt different. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel healed. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And maybe that in its own quiet way was enough.